Well, hello everybody. It is the 11th of January, and yes, I'm only just now getting around to doing part 2 of the book review video that I started pre-Christmas. I am sorry, I'm an imperfect person, and unfortunately, life has been hectic. Then we've had the Christmas holidays, had a much needed rest, which was great, but it did mean that this second part of my book review kind of video has ended up being a little bit delayed. I'm very sorry. I will strive to try harder and do better. So, got crazy hair because I've had my headphones on all day. The reason that I am here on the 11th doing this introduction is because originally I intended my book review video to just be one video, but unfortunately I rambled on for far too long, and so I decided to cut it into 2 parts. So this is your little kind of gentle introduction to this second part. I linked the first part in an iCard, so if this is like the random first video that you're seeing of this, and you haven't watched the first part of the book review, then I'll link it in an iCard above and you can go and watch that. And I hope you enjoy the second half of my book review. I have been reading Manacled since. I've just been through a real kind of like ready phase recently, but I am going to leave a little bit of a gap between this and when I do my next book review. So yeah, I really hope you enjoy this bit, and yeah, I'm going to kind of outro it at the same time. I might as well. Enjoy the upcoming video and I'll see you in the next one. And then the third book that I read, I cannot hold up in front of you because it was a digital book, and this is one that I was really sceptical. I'm going to be really honest. I was totally sceptical when I started reading it, and it has completely changed me and completely changed my perception of the self-publishing industry. It's changed. I wouldn't say that I was in any way biased about the self-publishing industry. I believe that self-publishing industry should always be there. I think it's a wonderful kind of opportunity for writers to be able to self-publish, but I am very much aware of the fact that the traditional publishing industry and the self-publishing industry don't always get on very well. So I kind of was a little bit like, oh, okay, this is my first dabble into reading self-published fiction, and it's also my very first dabble into reading fan fiction. It's not something I've ever really read before now, because I'll be honest, a lot of fan fiction just tends to be smut. And I love it. I'm always here for a little bit of smutty reading, but it just wasn't something that I really enjoyed. I prefer, if I'm going to read something like that, something that's a bit romance, a bit of a steamy novel, I like original narratives. I like something new. But having said that, I was like, okay, this book's been doing the round on TikTok. Again, people were doing videos of me before I read this book and me after I read this book. And I was like, right, okay, well, we read A Little Life. So I've been seeing this one over and over again. Let's do it. Let's get it. And the fact that it's freely available online as well meant that I thought, well, I'll start chapter 1. And if I don't like it, I don't have to finish it. And boy, did this book completely take me over for my holiday. We were on holiday for 2 weeks, and I'm not kidding. I finished The Wolf Den on, I think, day 2 or 3 of my holiday. And for the rest of the holiday, every single time I had even a spare 5 minutes, I was getting my phone out to read this book. And it is Manacled by SenLinYu. Now, if you know Manacled, if you've come across it, if you've read it yourself, you're going to be like, Charlotte, I know exactly how you feel, because every single person who's read this book, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, every single person that's read this book has absolutely loved it. And I have to say, I am exactly the same. And I'm going to discuss why. And I'm going to discuss what we can understand about it as writers in terms of self-publishing, in terms of fan fiction, in terms of what that could mean for you as a writer later. But first, I just want to talk about the book a little bit first. So Manacled is a fan fiction. They call it Hermione fan fiction because it's basically the story of Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger from Harry Potter. Those 2 characters. And it is a fan fiction about them as 2 characters in a alternate universe within the Harry Potter magical world. So the idea is, the kind of premise of the book is that actually Voldemort won the Wizarding War. Harry Potter has not won, and the book starts with the fact that Harry Potter has died. And so it starts at that point. It starts at the point that Voldemort's won, and it kind of, at the very beginning, it's kind of a Harry Potter, it's kind of a bit of a Harry Potter Handmaid's Tale mashup. And I have to say, I didn't quite like the fact that the Handmaid's Tale was quite as obvious in the beginning of it. You know, they wear the wings and they have the red coats on. I thought, I'm not really here for that kind of level of fan fiction that is just almost copying what's going on. But to be honest, the wings and the red coat became very, they were almost discarded quite quickly in the narrative, and they weren't really referenced that much going forward. I was really grateful for that. And basically, yeah, the idea is that women, the kind of the women of Hogwarts, a lot of the women that we know from the Harry Potter books are given as sex slaves to the Death Eaters because they need to have a repopulation effort, because all of the Death Eaters, a lot of the magical community have been killed in the war, and so these women are given. Now, Hermione is given to Draco Malfoy, and she has a memory that she's locked deep inside her mind that Voldemort can't access, and that they're hoping that Draco Malfoy can access, because he's gone on to become somebody called the High Reeve, who is an absolute force to be reckoned with, very feared, almost more powerful than Voldemort. And yeah, that's Draco Malfoy's character. And so that's the kind of very basic premise. It goes into that, kind of goes into their relationship. She goes to Malfoy Manor, and it's about kind of how they start to interact with each other. And then it goes back in time. There's a flashback section within the novel, and it goes back in time and it explains what happened from pretty much the point that Harry leaves school and starts to kind of investigate what's going on with Voldemort and trying to take Voldemort down. But the thing that I absolutely loved about it was that SenLinYu, the writer, almost took the idea of what happened in the Harry Potter books and kind of rewrote it to be what they thought would create a really good kind of like alternate narrative. And I absolutely loved that. And I think the reason I loved it was because so many of the things that, for one reason or another, J.K. Rowling didn't have time to fill out in the world of her own books, SenLinYu has been able to kind of broaden that world and open the world up and explain lots of different things. There's sections, so back in the flashback, Hermione has actually become a healer. She's become a potion master, and she develops potions to use in healing during the war. And it goes into like how she collects herbs and how she develops potions and where she goes around the wizarding world in order to learn about magical healing. And it was so immersive because it just broadened that magical world so much. And then obviously the relationship between Draco and Hermione is very all-consuming, I shall say. I don't want to ruin it because it's very much a book that I do think a lot of us should read, especially if you're a writer, because it's really, really interesting to see how SenLinYu has taken an existing universe and an existing canon of narrative and then created something that, in my opinion, is completely different, whilst also having quite a lot of the familiar things that we know from Harry Potter and the wizarding world. Now, it's interesting because Manacled itself, because it is a fan fiction, I don't know what the kind of process is for this becoming a book, before this being sold. I should imagine it never can be because J.K. Rowling has the rights to the Harry Potter universe. So I don't understand enough about all of that and how that works. Do let me know if you would like me to do a video specifically about Manacled and what it might mean in terms of like creating fan fiction and how that then can lead on to maybe becoming a book and this, that and the other. Let me know, because I'll do some investigation. I'll do a proper video about it if you want me to. Yeah, so I just think it's a really, really beautiful book in terms of like the storyline itself. And it did, at the end, there's a final line. There is a final line, and it didn't make me cry, but it did properly punch me in the chest, and it just made me think for so long. And I sat there and I keep coming back to it. I mean, I want a physical copy. I want a physical copy of Manacled. Now, you can't because it's not legal. It's not, well, I say it's not legal. I don't know what the legal status is of it, but because SenLinYu presumably can't publish it, then I can't pay a bookbinder to create a copy and me buy it from them because it's not a piece of licensed fiction, I believe. So the only way The only way for me to get a copy of Manacled is for me physically to print it out, which you can get typeset copies of Manacled, for me to print it out and for me to bind it myself. Now, you know, I have bound notebooks before. I am not above having a go at bookbinding to get myself a copy of Manacled, because I'd love to have a physical copy in my hand, because it's a beautiful book. I want to read it again. I already want to go back to it and read it now. It is so amazing. And actually what SenLinYu recommends is that you read the first section, then you read the flashback, then you read the first section again, and then you go to the third section and read the end. And it's weird because it's like, why would I reread a bit that I've already reread? But honestly, when you understand what happens in the flashback, you want to go back and read the whole first bit of the book again, because it just changes your perspective so much. And that is genius. That is the beauty of being able to write something that's digital. You know, when you can do that, you're not paying. Because if SenLinYu was going to create that as a printed book, they'd have to print it, then print the flashback, and then maybe look at printing it again, or just direct you to go back to the beginning of the book and start reading again. And I suppose you can do that, but there's something about doing it digitally that just worked so well. And yeah, I just thought that was genius, absolute genius. So I've been talking now for nearly 50 minutes. I need to get to the point of this, because otherwise it's not going to be useful for you. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about this is the fact that this book is so well written. I have absolutely no doubt that SenLinYu is going to get a book deal at some point for their future work, for their future writing, because the way that they set up a scene, the way that they craft the storyline, the way that they tease things happening without giving it away. So it's only when you can read something having seen the reveal, you reread, you go, oh, that's what that means, and you can go back. That takes some skill. That takes some mega skill to be able to do that. And I think because SenLinYu has written an alternate storyline, they're not just taking the events of Harry Potter and crafting, you know, a couple of relationships around it. SenLinYu has actually created an entire new work, in my opinion, which does have a lot of the characters, well, pretty much all of the main characters from Harry Potter, but kind of changes the world, changes the universe, changes the interactions, the events, the timeline. And that's what makes their writing so good, because they're not relying on J.K. Rowling's writing. They're not relying on J.K. Rowling's storyline. They're creating a new storyline from characters that they know. And actually, let me know if you have read it, and let me know if you read it as a result of this video. Let me know what you think in that instance. Do you think that SenLinYu relied too much on the fact that it is canon from Harry Potter? Or do you agree with me that they created something that in your opinion complements J.K. Rowling's books and kind of fleshes out the world, as opposed to trying to replace it? Because it's always a funny one, isn't it, when somebody takes something that you've created. So J.K. Rowling, for all of her problematic issues around her being not a very nice person these days, she created Harry Potter. She created the world of Harry Potter. It is remarkable to be able to create that world. And that is very much her achievement. Now, if somebody else took that and basically copied it, but did a little bit of extra and then tried to pass it off as their own work, then absolutely that should not be allowed to happen. But when somebody sees a universe and says, I want to add to that universe, but in my way, yes, I may use the same characters, and yes, I may use the same kind of place names, but I'm going to add, I'm going to fill in the blanks that haven't been created by the original creator, and I'm going to do this version. I think that should be allowed to some extent, because it benefits everybody. It benefits the readers who get more of that world. And it may even be that J.K. Rowling can publish, or J.K. Rowling's business industry can publish SenLinYu's book as part of can publish it. Oh, I'm going to sneeze again. Yeah. Can publish it as part of like the Potterverse, And then J.K. Rowling maybe gets royalties or gets a kickback from the kind of sales of SenLinYu's book. So SenLinYu as a writer is still getting recognition for the book that they've written, but J.K. Rowling is also getting a financial kickback from the fact that it is obviously her world, her characters, her universe that she's created. So it's an interesting one. I'll be interested to see how this develops for writers, for self-published writers, and for fan fiction writers. So if you fall into one of those categories, especially the self-published and the fan fiction, I will be really interested to see what happens with Manacled and whether anything will come of it, because I think there's such a demand for it that I'm absolutely positive that there are publishers that are looking at it and trying to find out what they can do with it, because it's got the potential to sell a lot of copies. So we'll see. I think in general, in terms of how they wrote the book, how SenLinYu wrote the book, I just think that idea of having a narrative and then going back and then going forward again is really clever in order to allow you to reassess a belief. So you have a belief about somebody in a book and you read it and then it changes, and to be able to go back and read that bit again and see it from the perspective of the other person is really clever. I don't think that a lot of people will do that, of saying go back and read it again, because I don't honestly think a lot of people would. If I was halfway through a book and someone said right, go back to the beginning and read it again, I'd be like, do I have to? Really? Do I have to go back and start all over again? But for some reason with Manacled, it worked. And so that's a really interesting one, is with what kind of narrative would it be beneficial for you to be able to go back and come forward and kind of change the timeline and repeat things so that your readers are reassessing their knowledge of the characters, reassessing their understanding of the things that happen in the book. I think that's a really interesting concept to have a play around with. And NaNoWriMo is an absolutely brilliant time of year to be playing around with that, to be playing around with your narrative. So maybe if you have a book, if you're writing a book at the moment and you think, oh, the timeline's a bit boring, it's a bit stale, I've seen this before in other books, what can I do to kind of mix it up? Can you play around with the timeline? Can you chop it up a little bit and reorder it? If you chopped your sections up of your book now and reordered it and read it through differently, what would that do to the narrative? How would that change the narrative? I'd be really interested to know if anybody tries doing that, and let me know what happens. I may try it with my Discoveries Prize for Fiction, not Discoveries Prize for Fiction, the Discoveries Prize that I'm entering at the end of this year in January. I might try it with that a little bit actually, to see if it changes the pace of the narrative a little bit, because there is a lot of kind of chopping back and forth in the timeline with that book. So it might be quite interesting to do that. So yes, let me know if you do that and what you think of Manacled. Let me know what you think of it. And then finally, but certainly not least, I wanted to discuss a classic, because a lot of the books that I look at the moment are books that are recently published, things that have come out, you know, within the last, sometimes the last 5 months, sometimes the last 5 years. And I wanted to look at something. I wanted to read a book that had come out many, many years ago. And so I picked Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. Now, this has been a book that I've had on my bookshelf for a very long time. It's been in my collection just because I'm like, oh, it's a classic, it's a Brontë, I'll buy it and I'll keep it. And I've never read it. And so I got it out the other day. I was going to York. Now, you may have seen this book if you've seen my York trip to go and see Shardlake at the York Theatre Royal. Then you will have seen this in the video because I was reading it on my way to York and back again. And I think I took it then because it was such a small book. And I thought, oh, well, I can carry it with me and I can take it on the train. And you know, I absolutely loved it. I'm going to say something quite controversial now. Gird your loins, get ready. I think Anne Brontë is the best Brontë sister in terms of being a writer. I know, I'm sorry. To all the Charlotte Brontë lovers, to all the Emily Brontë lovers, I'm sorry. But I think that Anne Brontë could be the best writer of the three. And the reason for that is that I just think she writes in such an immersive way, and in a way that the characters are so relatable. The character of Anne Grey, and I know it's a personal novel, I know it's set on Anne Brontë's own experience of going out and being a governess. And so I'm really looking forward to reading The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which is another one of her novels, because that's not as semi-autobiographical. So it'll be interesting to see what she's like writing when it comes to writing something that is pure fiction. But I just thought that this was so beautifully written. I have to say that a lot of books from like that period, you know, the Austen, Dickens, Brontë, Hardy novels, those kind of things, I can find them really difficult to read sometimes because the language is totally different to what we're used to reading these days. They have different ways of expressing themselves. They have different ways. They had even different narrative techniques back then. You know, they do a lot of descriptions. You know, you might go a whole page where something's describing what the field looked like on a Saturday afternoon or whatever. And it can be a little bit like, oh, it's not really kind of holding me the pace and things. And it's because there were different books that were written at a different time to what we write now. In the same way that the way that we as people have changed how we consume video. You know, you now have 7 seconds to capture somebody's interest on a TikTok before this. In fact, I don't even think it's 7 seconds. It might be like 7 seconds on your profile that someone will look through your profile and decide whether they want to follow you or not. And I think it's something like 2 seconds in a video to catch someone's attention. You go back 50, 60 years ago, the fact that you were on television would have captured somebody's attention. So we change a lot. And that's the thing with books as well, is we change as writers, we change as readers. And I think that's something really interesting about why some of these books, even though they are still classics, how are they still classics when the way that we read and the way that we write has changed so much? Is that because somebody tells us that they're classics? Somebody tells us that we should be enjoying these books? Is it because we study them? Or is there something that actually attracts us to those storylines over and over again? And I think the thing with Agnes Grey for me that I really liked was that even though it was written way back in the 1800s, for me it felt quite contemporary in the way that Agnes, in the way that Agnes Grey spoke, in the way that she reacted to a lot of the things that were happening in the book. It just felt like it could have been 20 years ago, not like 200 years ago, when she was interacting with these people. You know, she's having to go to these houses and she's looking after these really horrible children in many cases, and talking about how she cried and she was upset, but she didn't want anybody to feel it. And then the love story in this as well, I think is really beautiful. And I'm so sad that nobody has made Agnes Grey into a film or a TV adaptation yet, because I think it's a really beautiful kind of standalone story of a woman who is overlooked by so many and yet manages to have her happy ending at the end. And it's just a really, really beautiful book. I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things that I loved about the way that this was written was that it was quite linear. And I know, I've just come on to talking about something linear after having talked about Manacled and how it jumps around in the timeline. But I do think for the right type of story, doing something that is very kind of traditionally linear, that starts at one place and ends at another, works really well. And I think at the beginning of this book, we meet Agnes Grey, who has been cosseted at home. She's very innocent, she's very naive, she's never really left home before. Her mother and her sisters are very much like, oh, we don't think you should leave, you should stay here. And then by the end of the book, she is this kind of fiercely independent woman. She's living, she's kind of had the experience of having gone into different people's homes. She's grown as a character, and I really loved seeing that in the way that sometimes we don't necessarily get to see that as much in more modern narratives, because we're very much dealing with the events that are happening. Whereas this definitely for me felt like a personal development story of the main character as much as events happening, because there weren't really many big events that happened in this story. And it is a very short book. It's very, very short. I would have actually loved it to be a lot longer and to kind of understand a lot more of the day-to-day life that Agnes Grey led, and maybe actually after the events at the end of the book. Won't tell you what happens, but at the end I like to see more longevity afterwards as well. But I think yeah, I liked the fact that it was a very traditional personal development. There's a lot of very standard kind of romance, not tropes. They've become tropes now because people have repeated them so often, but I don't think they were necessarily tropes when Agnes Grey was written. I think Anne Brontë maybe set that up, that kind of people getting their comeuppance, shall we say, and the kind of manipulations of love and the trials and tribulations of love and all that kind of stuff. They are written into this book, but they're very subtle. And I think that in terms of an exercise in learning how to craft narrative and learning how to craft fiction, this is a really beautiful kind of example to us of how Anne Brontë was growing as a writer. And I think this comes on to a really important point, actually, which I thought of as a result of reading this, is that we as writers now shouldn't be afraid to publish smaller versions of our writing, shouldn't be afraid to do the writing exercises, the things that help us create that big, fantastic novel that we've always been wanting to write. So, for example, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is a proper novel, whereas this is a novella. It's very short, and you know, it was treated as such. It was treated as, it says here on the back, an expose of the frequently isolated, intellectually stagnant and emotionally starved conditions under which many governesses worked in the mid-19th century. It was seen almost as a bit of a case study because it's so short. And yet what I see looking at it is a writer that is developing her craft, that is looking at how she can create storyline, how she can interact with the reader, how she can excite people with her writing, but is doing that in small ways at first before she goes on to write her big novel. And so that's made me really think, because I'm kind of always fixating on the book, the novel, the 200,000 word novel. And actually, could I create some short stories? Could I create some novellas? Something like this that is a whole story, a whole narrative from beginning to end. It actually gets written, and maybe I could self-publish it on Amazon or on a different platform or something like that. But what it's doing all the time is it's teaching me how to write. It's teaching me what the best way is to write. It's teaching me about story. It's teaching me about creating the whole storyline. And so I'm going to take Agnes Grey and Anne Brontë's writing as a huge sign that it's okay to publicly develop as a writer, to through our published works and self-published works, to show development. We don't have to be the absolutely amazing, polished novelist for our very first novel. It's okay to start with smaller things, with smaller exercises, to start putting bits out there of our writing and to learn and to develop our craft as we go along. So that's why I thought this was really interesting to mention, because it really made me think differently about how I will write and my craft and my kind of practice of writing going forward. So yeah, I am going to get a copy of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall soon. I just need to decide which version I get. There's so many really beautiful reprinted versions of that book. I think I would quite like one of the new cloth bound ones that have got kind of like the graphic designs on them. I think I would quite like one of them. But then the kind of the book lover in me goes, oh no, get one of the like classic first printed versions, you know. But we'll see. We shall see. There is a very ugly version that I definitely do not want to get, and that seems to be the version that is most readily available at the moment. I'm not going to say which one it is, because I don't want to diss anybody publicly on a video, but I definitely don't want that version. So yes, we will see. So I am sorry, it's been a very long video, but hopefully it's been useful. We've kind of definitely looked at very different types of books this time around, and that was something that I really wanted to do. I don't feel like we've gone as in depth into the very minutiae of those individual books this time. So if that's something that you liked in my first video but you think is missing from this one, let me know. Honestly, I say this in all of my videos. I'm like, leave me a comment in the description. I'm not doing it because I want the video to reach more people or to do it for marketing purposes. I'm doing it because I genuinely want to know how these videos are helpful for you as a writer. So let me know if there's something in this video that you think, oh, I would have preferred a little bit more about this, or oh, I really liked that bit. Can you do more of that next time? Let me know. Send me a comment, put me a comment in the description, and I will put that into the plan for the next video. So probably the next video that kind of looks at books and craft, and where we go into depth on some of the books that I've read recently and what I think of them in terms of what we can learn as writers, I'm probably going to do that next one, either January or February. So there's plenty of time. Have a read of some books. Send me some book recommendations if you'd like me to read a specific book and then talk about it again in terms of the craft and the things that we can learn. And I will leave this here. I'm going to shut up now. I am rapidly losing daylight because I've talked that much that the sun is actually going down. And yeah, let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you somehow got this far through and you've watched it to the end and you are not subscribed, why? Because by sticking around to the end of this video, clearly you mustn't hate the sound of my voice as much as I think you do. So please, if you've got to the end, hit subscribe button. And for everybody who is already subscribed, all of my lovely subscribers, thank you so much for watching this video. Leave me a... What shall we leave in the... What should we leave? Leave a camera. Because Stanley tried to get in my tripod bag while I was filming this and it was hilarious. So put me a little camera emoji in the comments if you've watched this far, and I will see you in my next video. In fact, I'll see you on Friday because I'll be doing my next NaNoWriMo update. That's the end of week 1 update video. So yeah, I will see you Friday. Okay guys, take care. Bye.